In our last video, we took a look at some different data types, but sometimes we might want one data type to be converted into a different data type because some data types don't play well together. For example, if I said x equals 4 to assign the value of 4 to the variable of x, what if I wanted to say that the ID of something was 4? I could say print, open parentheses, and ID is going to be a string. I'll say ID colon space, close quote. I'll give a plus sign and say I want to add to that the number 4, which is x. Is this going to work? It's not, because the ID colon space in quotes, that's a string. The x, its value, is an integer. We cannot add an integer to a string, and it's going to come back and tell us that we've got an error. What we could do instead, though, is we could convert the x to a string value. You see, I could use the string function, str, and in parentheses, if I say x, it's going to come back and say, oh yeah, the string value is a 4. Notice it puts it in single quotes, which, by the way, brings up an interesting point. We can use straight single quotes or straight double quotes interchangeably. So let's use this string function nested within our print function. I can say print, open parentheses, again, I'll do a quote, ID colon space, close quote, plus, and I want to give the string value of the variable x. I'll say str, and in parentheses, I'll say x, and then I'll close my parentheses for the print function and press enter. And now it says ID colon space 4. Perfect. We could also get the integer value of a floating point data type. We could say, for example, int for integer, open parentheses, 3.14159, close parentheses and press enter, and it's going to come back and say the integer value of pi that I put in there is 3. Now, here's what might not be obvious. When we do something like this, it's obvious that the nearest integer to 3.14159 is 3, but what if I said integer of 3.9? Do you think it's going to round up to a 4? It does not. When we say integer and give a floating point value in parentheses, it's simply going to ignore the decimal and everything after it. Which begs the question, how do I round to the nearest number? Or round up if I'm right exactly in the middle? Here's a little trick. We can add a 0.5 to our floating point value. For example, I could say integer, and in parentheses, 3.9 plus 0.5. And this will round to the nearest integer, which is going to be 4, because that would add up to 4.4, and we would ignore the dot 4, leaving us with a 4. And I could do an integer 3.1 plus 0.5, and obviously the nearest integer is 3, and by only adding a 0.5, we get to 3.6. It's going to ignore the 0.6, and it's going to give us the nearest integer of a 3. And as one final example, we could use the float function to say, give me the floating point value of, let's say, an integer like 3. What would the floating point value be? Well, floating point values have a decimal. Well, that's simply going to be 3.0. And that's a look at how we can do some conversions between our data types.